Have you ever wondered what happens when a place is so isolated, so secretive, that even its walls seem to whisper? Before we begin, I need to ask, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Because what you're about to see isn't just a story. It's a descent into one of Norway's most chilling mysteries. The winter of 1934 settled upon the fjordlands with a quiet ferocity. Snow drifted in sheets across the valley of Niskagen, muffling the sharp edges of the granite peaks that rose like watchmen over the small, frozen settlement below. The locals, loggers, fishermen, and a few scattered farmers, kept mostly to their own hearths in those months, venturing out only for work or prayer. They spoke of the long nights as if they were alive, and perhaps in some way they were. For within that isolation stood a structure that loomed above the valley like a half-remembered nightmare, Dr. Halberg Sanitarium. It had been built in 1919, perched on the northern slope above the lake Overvatten. To the passer-by, it might have appeared like a manor or an institution of charity. Its high arched windows and timbered balconies suggested a kind of grim elegance. But to the townsfolk of Niskagen, it was something else entirely, a place where people went and seldom returned. The building was said to be funded by the Ministry of Health after the Great War, meant to serve as a facility for neurological and psychological treatment. Its founder, Dr. Emil Halberg, had returned from Vienna full of modern theories, Freudian, experimental, and to some, blasphemous. The villagers called it the Mountain Asylum, though few dared approach it after dark. On the morning of January 7, 1934, a stranger arrived by the frozen rail line that cut through the valley. His name was Anders Røkke, a journalist from Bergen, sent by the Nordlys Gazette to investigate rumors of deaths and disappearances linked to the sanitarium. Officially, his assignment was an exposé on outdated medical practices in rural Norway. Unofficially, his editor wanted a story that would sell, a story drenched in snow, isolation, and scandal. Anders stepped from the train with a valise in one hand and his typewriter case in the other. The platform was deserted, save for a stationmaster with a wool cap pulled low and a pipe that had gone cold. The man greeted him with a nod, but said nothing of welcome. Anders looked up the valley toward the mountains, where a grey shape loomed through the curtain of snow. "That the sanitarium?" he asked. The stationmaster spat into the snow. "If you mean Halberg's place, you'll see it clearer when the wind dies. The doctor keeps to himself these days." "Has he many patients?" "Used to," the man said. "Now it's mostly staff and a few that never leave. You'll find out soon enough, I suppose." Anders thanked him, hoisted his case, and set out along the road that wound upward through the forest. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow. Ravens watched from the treetops as he passed. The air grew colder, thinner. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, a single hollow note that carried through the valley like a summons. It took nearly an hour to reach the wrought-iron gates. They were tall, ornate, and faintly rusted, bearing a crest that had once been gilded but was now dulled by years of weather. Upon it, the initials EH entwined around the image of a serpent. Beyond the gates, the sanitarium rose from the hillside like a monolith, its walls of dark stone flecked with ice, its tall windows glimmering with a pale interior light. A man was waiting at the entrance, a thin figure in a black overcoat and round spectacles. His head was shaven close, and his expression was one of polite indifference. "You must be Mr. Røkke," he said in a precise tone. "Dr. Halberg received your letter. I am Franz Lon, the steward. Please, follow me." Anders entered, and the heavy doors closed behind him with a sound that echoed through the marble hall. The air inside was warm, but carried a faint odor of antiseptic and old wood. The walls were lined with portraits of medical men, their eyes rendered in dark oil, following him as he passed. They walked through corridors that twisted like arteries, each lined with numbered doors. From one of them came a low murmur, a voice whispering something rhythmic and wet, as if reciting a prayer through water. Lon did not seem to notice. At last, they came to the main office. Inside, behind a vast oak desk, stood Dr. Emil Halberg himself. He was taller than Anders expected, stooped but commanding, with a scholar's pallor and eyes that gleamed like mercury behind round spectacles. His hair was streaked white at the temples, and his hands, though large, trembled faintly when he reached for the journalist's letter. "Mr. Røkke," he said, his voice cultured and smooth, "you must forgive the circumstances. We do not often receive visitors in winter." "I appreciate your hospitality, Doctor," Anders replied. "I was hoping to write a piece on your work here. The public is fascinated by the advances in mental health treatments." Dr. Halberg smiled faintly. "Fascinated, yes, but seldom understanding. You may write what you wish, provided you show respect to the truth, and to my patients." He gestured toward the window, where the snow swirled like smoke. "You see, Mr. Røkke, the mind is not unlike this storm, chaotic, cold, sometimes violent. My work is simply to observe the patterns within it." Anders nodded, though he sensed beneath the doctor's calm a strange intensity, a conviction bordering on obsession. That evening he was shown to his quarters, a modest guest room overlooking the frozen lake. The halls were quiet, the staff few. He noticed the nurses moved with an unusual restraint, as though watched even when alone. At dinner, only 3 others sat at the long table, a nurse named Sigrid Meyer, the steward Lon, and a gaunt patient who stared fixedly at his plate and said nothing. The meal was subdued. Dr. Halberg did not appear. Afterward, Anders retired to his room to write notes by lamplight. He could hear faint sounds through the floorboards, voices, footsteps, and once, a strange metallic scraping. When he opened the window, the cold struck him like a blade. Below, across the courtyard, a single window burned with light far into the night. A silhouette passed before it, tall, thin, unmistakably the doctor's. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, a scream echoed through the corridor. It was brief, cut off almost at once, but it came from somewhere deep within the building. Anders leapt to his feet, threw on his coat, and opened the door. The hallway was empty, the lamps flickering. A nurse hurried past him, eyes wide, but said nothing. When he called out, she only shook her head and vanished through a locked door at the far end. Moments later, silence reclaimed the hall. Anders stood there, heart pounding, until he noticed something on the floor, a small, dark stain near the baseboard. He crouched, touched it, and found it sticky. Blood, fresh, still warm. From somewhere above, the old clock chimed once more, hollow and deliberate. The morning after the scream, the sanitarium seemed almost unnaturally calm. Snow had fallen thick during the night, muting every sound beyond the walls. From his window, Anders saw only the grey expanse of the frozen lake and the blurred outline of the pines beyond it. The building, immense and still, appeared to be holding its breath. When he descended to breakfast, he found only Nurse Sigrid Meyer in the dining hall, her expression composed but her eyes ringed with fatigue. She poured him coffee and asked, "Did you sleep well, Mr. Røkke?" "Not especially," Anders said. "I heard something in the night, someone crying out. Is everything all right?" She hesitated, spoon poised above the sugar bowl. "Patients often experience episodes during storms," she said quietly. "The wind carries sound strangely through the walls. You may hear more than there truly is." Anders studied her face. She spoke carefully, as though each word might be overheard. "And the locked ward at the far end of the corridor? What is it used for?" Sigrid's eyes flicked upward in warning. "You should not go there. Those are Dr. Halberg's private patients." He let the matter drop for the moment. But the journalist in him was already turning over the possibilities. Private patients, unexplained screams, stains that looked like blood. He finished his coffee, pocketed his notebook, and set out to explore. The sanitarium by daylight revealed its strange architecture. Its corridors branched like veins, some leading to observation rooms, others to sealed-off wings with heavy iron doors. Brass plaques bore numbers rather than names. The faint hum of generators came from below, mingling with the rhythmic drip of melting ice from the eaves. He passed one open ward where half a dozen patients sat in silence. Some stared at the walls, one rocked gently, humming a hymn in a language Anders did not recognize. A nurse at the end of the room turned sharply when she noticed him and pulled the curtain across the doorway. Down another hallway, a set of double doors bore a sign in Norwegian: Avdeling 4, Adgang forbud, Ward 4, Access forbidden. This must be the locked section. The keyhole gleamed newly polished. As Anders leaned closer, he heard something faint, murmuring perhaps or breathing, but could not tell from which side of the door it came. He was about to move on when he noticed a shadow in the reflection of the brass plate behind him. Turning, he found the steward, Franz Lon, standing a few paces away. "You are exploring very freely, Mr. Røkke," Lon said. His tone was not accusatory, but coldly factual. "I'm simply learning about the facility," Anders replied. "If I am to write about Dr. Halberg's work, I should understand his methods." Lon's gaze did not waver. Understanding can be dangerous when based on incomplete information. "I will inform the doctor that you are eager to learn." With that, he turned and walked off, his steps making no sound on the stone floor. That evening, Halberg himself appeared at dinner. The doctor seemed composed, though his eyes were rimmed with fatigue. The candlelight played across his angular face, giving him an almost spectral quality. "I trust your accommodations are satisfactory?" he asked. "Quite," Anders said, "though I am curious about the scope of your work. How many patients are here at present?" 22, Halberg replied, sipping his wine. "Of those, 15 are convalescent, for are under observation, and 3, he paused, lowering his glass slightly. 3 are part of my ongoing study." "Study?" Anders pressed. Halberg smiled faintly. "The nature of consciousness, Mr. Røkke. You might say I am exploring the threshold between sanity and what lies beyond it." The words lingered in the air. Sigrid glanced up briefly from her plate, but said nothing. Later, when the others had retired, Anders approached her in the corridor. "Those 3 patients, what sort of study is the doctor conducting?" She looked around before answering. "He believes the mind can be reached through electrical means, not just the brain, but the very soul. He says he can touch what lives behind thought." Anders frowned. "You mean shock therapy?" Sigrid hesitated. "Not exactly. It's something he developed himself. He calls it transference stimulation. It's supposed to draw out what he calls the latent self." She drew closer, lowering her voice. "But the ones he tests it on, they change. Their eyes, their voices, they speak in tongues, sometimes in perfect imitation of others long dead." Anders felt a chill crawl up his neck. "And the scream last night?" Her hands trembled slightly. "One of the study patients. I helped clean the ward this morning. The bed was empty, but the straps were torn. Dr. Halberg said the subject was transferred to another facility." "Do you believe him?" She looked down. "I don't know what to believe anymore." That night, Anders waited until the hallways fell silent. He had decided he could not leave without seeing the locked ward for himself. Taking a candle and his small camera, he slipped from his room. The air was heavy with disinfectant and the faint hum of machinery. When he reached the forbidden doors, he found them unlocked. The key was still in the latch, as if someone had left in haste. Slowly, he turned it and stepped inside. The smell struck him first, metallic, faintly sweet, like blood mixed with ozone. The room beyond was lined with narrow beds, most empty, though straps hung loosely from their frames. A machine stood in the center, a brass generator wired to a series of electrodes and glass tubes that pulsed faintly with light. On a nearby table lay a notebook stamped with the Halberg crest. He flipped it open. Inside were notes written in the doctor's spidery hand. Subject 17. Resistance decreasing. Vocalizations indicate multiple layers of cognition. Memory bleed observed. Subject 19. Claimed to perceive the Watchers. Refused sedation. Disappeared during test. Subject 20. Termination recommended. Anders felt the blood drain from his face. He turned the next page and froze. There was a photograph pasted inside. A man strapped to the very same bed, eyes rolled back, mouth open in a silent scream. The edges of the photo were still damp, as though recently developed. Then, from somewhere behind him, came a faint clicking sound, like metal against tile. He turned slowly. A figure stood at the far end of the ward, half in shadow. Its hospital gown hung loose, its hair matted. The eyes were wrong, white, unfocused, yet somehow aware. "Anders," it said in a voice that was not its own. "He's watching." The candle guttered. A low hum began to rise from the machine, though no one had touched it. The tubes flared, filling the room with a sickly blue light. The figure convulsed once, twice, and then collapsed. When Anders stumbled forward, the body was gone. Only the echo of its voice remained, whispering somewhere deep in the walls. At dawn, the sanitarium seemed to hold its secrets more tightly than ever. A brittle silence hung over the corridors, broken only by the steady ticking of the clocks that lined the walls. Anders barely slept. The image from the doctor's notebook, the man's face twisted in agony, was burned behind his eyes. He kept the photograph he'd found, folded inside his jacket. He needed proof of what was happening here, something tangible beyond the whispers and vanishing patients. Yet, as he descended to breakfast, he noticed something peculiar. The staff avoided looking at him. Conversations halted when he passed. Even Sigrid, who had confided in him the night before, would not meet his gaze. At the table, only Dr. Halberg sat waiting, composed as always. "You are pale this morning, Mr. Røkke," he observed. "Bad dreams, perhaps?" "Something like that," Anders replied carefully. "Dreams are the echoes of the soul," Halberg said. "We ignore them at our peril." He smiled faintly, though his eyes seemed to bore straight through him. "I trust you haven't been wandering during the night. The sanitarium is old. Its walls are not safe." Anders managed a tight smile. "I heard machinery in the lower wards. It kept me awake." Halberg nodded once. "Yes, maintenance continues at all hours. A mind does not sleep. Neither, therefore, should the instruments that seek to heal it." Their conversation ended there, but Anders caught a flicker of something in the doctor's expression, a calculation perhaps. Later that day, Anders went outside for air. The courtyard lay silent beneath a fresh layer of snow, the iron gates glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. From this distance, the sanitarium looked almost peaceful, but when the wind shifted, he could swear he heard faint murmurs from the walls themselves, a low, rhythmic pulse like breathing beneath stone. He turned sharply, half expecting to see someone behind him, but the yard was empty. The only mark in the snow was a single set of footprints, his own, leading back toward the door. When he returned to his room, something was waiting for him on his desk, an envelope unmarked. Inside was a small strip of photographic film. He held it to the light and saw, faintly, the outline of a face, blurred, hollow-eyed, unmistakably the same man from the notebook. Only now, behind the patient, another figure appeared, tall, indistinct, and standing in the shadows. The door creaked. Sigrid entered quietly. "You should not keep that," she whispered. "If he finds it, he'll say you interfered with his research." "You put it there?" Anders asked. She nodded once. "That man, Subject 19, he was a seaman from Tromsø, brought here after he started hearing voices that told him to look into mirrors. He said the reflections spoke back. The doctor tried his device on him 3 times. After the last session, he was gone. No record of discharge. And you believe he's dead?" Her voice trembled. "I think he's somewhere in this building. I hear him sometimes, calling from the vents." They both froze as a faint knock echoed through the radiator behind the bed. 3 taps, slow and deliberate. Sigrid's face drained of color. "Do you hear it?" Anders pressed his ear to the cold metal. A whisper drifted through, distant, broken, like air drawn through teeth. "He's in the walls." Then silence. Sigrid backed toward the door. "You must leave tonight," she said, "before he finds out what you've seen. And if I don't—" She looked at him with something close to pity. "Then you'll end up like them, part of his study." That evening, Anders packed his notes and the photograph. The snow outside had begun again, heavier now, making escape difficult. Still, he planned to reach the rail line by dawn. As he passed the main corridor, the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The air seemed thicker, charged. From the far end came a sound like a heartbeat, slow, deep, echoing through the pipes. He followed it, camera ready. When he reached the locked ward, the door stood open again. The machine inside was silent now, but the smell of ozone and iron remained. Upon one of the beds lay another photograph, newly printed, edges wet. It was of him, standing in the corridor, camera in hand, taken from behind. He spun around, heart hammering. The corridor was empty, and yet, somewhere in the humming dark, came a faint whisper that was neither wind nor human voice. "You're next." The machine flickered to life. By the next morning, the storm had sealed the mountain road beneath drifts taller than a man. Escape was no longer possible. The telephone lines were dead, and the radio in the staff lounge emitted only static. The world outside might as well have ceased to exist. Anders kept to his room most of the day, rereading his notes. He had gathered fragments of truth, a photograph, cryptic medical records, Sigrid's whispered confessions, but no proof that would stand against Halberg's reputation. He knew now the doctor would not allow him to leave. That night, a faint scratching came from beneath his floorboards. He followed the sound, prying up a loose panel near the radiator. Inside lay a small, leather-bound journal, edges brittle with age. It bore no name, only the embossed crest of the sanitarium. The first entries were dated 1928, written in hurried, slanted Norwegian. Experiment 3 complete. Subject exhibited transference of memory fragments between test group. Possible continuity of consciousness beyond singular host. Patient expired, pulse ceased, but voice continued through intercom feed. Halberg believes we have pierced the veil. Anders turned the pages faster. Later entries grew darker. Staff instructed to burn failed subjects. Sound persists in ventilation system. Doctor insists it is residual energy, but I am not certain. He calls it the Bridge of Halberg. Claims the mind, once unmoored, can cross into others. No longer sure who is speaking when he addresses me. The final page was written in a shaking hand. If anyone finds this, do not let him complete Phase 7. He means to use himself next. Anders looked up sharply. The hum of the pipes had changed. It was no longer steady. Now it pulsed, almost breathing. He moved to the door, but the handle was ice-cold, frozen solid. Then came the voice, faint and distant, through the vent. Phase 7 begins at midnight. He pressed his ear closer. Another voice, unmistakably Halberg's, answered, "Prepare the subject." The machine below began to rumble again. Anders realized, with a surge of dread, that he was hearing it through the very same walls the missing patients had vanished into. He blew out his lamp and began to pack, quietly, methodically. The journal, the photographs, his camera. He would risk the storm if he had to. But when he turned back toward the window, a face stared at him from the other side of the glass. Pale, bloodless. Its mouth moved soundlessly, repeating one phrase over and over. "He's already inside." The pane cracked. Anders didn't remember screaming, though later he would recall the sound of shattering glass as vividly as breath. When he looked again, the face in the window was gone, leaving only frost where its features had been. The snow beyond was undisturbed. He locked the shutters and sat in darkness for a long time, listening. Every creak of the old sanitarium seemed magnified, every whisper of wind a threat. He knew now that whatever Dr. Halberg was doing beneath these floors went beyond medicine. The journal's last entry echoed in his mind. He means to use himself next. By morning, the storm had not eased. The corridors were dim, lit by flickering lamps. The staff moved like sleepwalkers. No one spoke above a murmur. Anders caught sight of Sigrid near the main staircase and hurried to her. "I found a journal," he whispered. "Someone documented the experiments. Your doctor means to try his machine on himself." Her eyes widened. "Then it's too late," she said softly. "He's already preparing the chamber." "The chamber?" "The mirror room," she said. "It's beneath the western wing. It was sealed years ago after one of the patients set fire to it. But he rebuilt it in secret. Says reflection holds the purest form of consciousness." "Take me there," Anders demanded. Sigrid hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me. But if we're caught, he'll lock us both inside." They descended through a narrow stairwell lined with damp stone. The air grew colder, heavy with a faint metallic taste. A generator throbbed somewhere below. At the end of a long passage stood a steel door. Sigrid drew a key from her apron and turned it. The hinges groaned open. What lay beyond was like nothing Anders had imagined. The room was circular, lined entirely with tall mirrors, dozens of them, each set into the wall at slight angles, reflecting one another into infinity. In the center stood Halberg's machine, its coils pulsing with dull orange light. Cables ran from it into the floor and ceiling, vanishing into the walls. And beside the machine stood Dr. Halberg himself. He turned as they entered, unfazed. "Mr. Røkke," he said calmly, as though greeting an expected guest. "And Nurse Meyer, you've come at an opportune moment. What are you doing?" Anders asked. "Completing my work," Halberg replied. "You read the notes, didn't you? You know what this is." He placed a hand on the machine, affectionately. For years I sought to isolate consciousness, to prove it survives beyond flesh. My patients were imperfect vessels, their minds fractured. But mine will not. Sigrid stepped forward. You'll kill yourself. Halberg smiled faintly. Death is a barrier only to those who fear what follows. He gestured toward the mirrors. Do you see? Each one reflects a fragment of what we are. In them lies the multiplicity of being, the echoes of every thought unspoken. The machine will unify them. I will become more than one mind. Anders took a step closer. The people you experimented on, they died, Doctor. Did they? Halberg's eyes gleamed. Their bodies ceased, yes. But I still hear them. In the walls. In the light. They guide me now. He turned to the control panel, adjusting the dials. The air began to buzz with static. I suggest you stand back. Anders lunged forward. Stop this. But Halberg pulled the lever. The mirrors flared with light, blinding and cold. The machine roared like a living thing. Sigrid screamed as her reflection multiplied. 1, 2, 10 versions of her, each slightly delayed, each moving just out of sync. Anders shielded his eyes. Through the glare, he saw Halberg standing motionless in the center of the chamber, arms outstretched, his mouth open in a silent cry. His reflection shimmered, then fractured. The light went out. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. When Anders opened his eyes, the machine had gone dark. Smoke curled from its coils. Halberg was gone. In his place stood the faint outline of a man within the mirror, a shadow that moved even when Anders did not. Sigrid trembled. Where is he? Anders stared at the reflection. It smiled. Everywhere. For several seconds, Anders could not breathe. The reflection in the mirror looked exactly like Dr. Halberg, the same sharp jaw, the same wire spectacles glinting, but the eyes were empty, flickering like candlelight behind glass. Sigrid clutched Anders's arm. We have to get out, she whispered. The reflection tilted its head, perfectly matching Halberg's old gesture of curiosity. You can leave, it said softly, though no sound came from its lips. But you'll take me with you. A web of cracks rippled across the mirror's surface. The reflection leaned closer, its face warping through the fractures. Anders grabbed Sigrid's hand and pulled her toward the door. Behind them, the machine groaned, and the lights flared again, a dying pulse from a body refusing to stay buried. They fled up the stairs, the echo of their footsteps doubling unnaturally, as if someone else ran just behind them. When they reached the main corridor, the lamps were flickering in rhythm with the same pulse that had filled the chamber below. He's not gone, Sigrid said, her voice trembling. He's inside the mirrors, inside the walls. Anders turned, and for an instant, in the polished brass of the stair rail, he saw Halberg's face again, smiling faintly as though proud. They reached Anders's room. He threw his notes and the recovered journal into his satchel. We'll wait until dawn, he said. The storm's easing. We'll go on foot if we have to. Sigrid nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the mirror above the desk. Its surface was fogging, though the room was cold. Letters began to form in the condensation, one after another, drawn by an unseen hand. I am not finished. The glass cracked sharply down the center. Sigrid stumbled back, crossing herself. Anders covered the mirror with a blanket and doused the lamp. They sat in silence, listening. Somewhere deep within the building came the faint, rhythmic tapping again, the same 3 beats he had heard through the radiator days earlier. Tap, 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 and then, beneath it, a 4th. When Anders finally dared look out the window, the snow had stopped. The world was perfectly still. But in every pane of glass along the sanitarium's facade, he could see faint shapes moving, shadows of men and women pacing behind the frost, trapped forever in reflection. Sigrid whispered, "They're all still here." Anders gripped his satchel tighter. "Then we leave before he joins us too." They stepped into the corridor, unaware that one of their reflections, just one, did not follow. It lingered in the doorway, smiling. The night was cold enough to burn the lungs. Anders and Sigrid crossed the courtyard in silence, their boots sinking deep into the snow. The storm had passed, leaving the world unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, only the creak of the iron gate as they pushed it open. The sanitarium behind them loomed like a relic carved from the mountain itself, its windows black, except for one faint glow in the western wing, where the mirror room had been. Neither of them spoke as they started down the road toward the valley. After half an hour, Anders stopped. "Listen," he whispered. At first there was nothing. Then a distant hum, faint and steady, rising and falling like breath. It came from behind them. Sigrid turned, eyes wide. "It's him. He's still using the machine." "That's impossible," Anders said. "The generator was destroyed." But as they watched, the faint glow in the sanitarium windows brightened, flickering from room to room like something crawling through the building. They began to run. By dawn, they reached the frozen lake over Ivaten. The ice stretched unbroken across its surface, pale beneath the weak morning sun. On the far shore, the forest began, a path that would lead them toward the railway and, hopefully, safety. Anders paused long enough to glance back. The sanitarium was barely visible through the mist. Yet for a moment he thought he saw figures standing on the roof, silent, motionless, watching. Sigrid tugged his sleeve. "Don't look. Keep walking." They stepped onto the ice. It groaned beneath their weight, the sound echoing like a distant moan. Halfway across, the humming returned, stronger now, vibrating through the frozen water beneath their feet. Anders froze. "Do you hear that?" "It's coming from below," she said, her breath clouding the air. The ice beneath them pulsed once, a ripple of dull light spreading outward like veins of lightning trapped in glass. Then, through the frozen surface, Anders saw movement, a dark shape, human, drifting just below the ice. A face turned upward. Dr. Halberg's face. His eyes opened. Anders stumbled back, pulling Sigrid with him. Cracks split the ice in jagged lines, racing toward the shore. The hum rose to a scream. They ran, slipping, falling, scrambling onto the bank as the ice shattered behind them. The lake erupted in a burst of steam and light that lit the mountainside. When it cleared, the surface was smooth again, untouched. Sigrid collapsed against a tree, gasping. What was that? How could he? Anders looked at the satchel clutched to his chest. He's not just in the building anymore. Whatever he did, he's everywhere the reflections reach. The words hung between them, heavy and certain. Every frozen puddle, every shard of ice, every glint of morning light could be another doorway. From somewhere far behind, carried faintly on the wind, came a voice they both recognized. Calm, measured, unmistakable. The experiment continues. Sigrid gripped Anders's arm. We can't stop him, can we? Anders shook his head. Not yet. But maybe we can contain him. He opened the satchel and drew out the stolen journal, the pages fluttering like trapped wings. Inside, near the back, he saw something new, ink that hadn't been there before, still wet. Phase 8 begins when they return. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the book. The wind picked up. The lake was silent once more, save for the faint shimmer of something beneath the ice, moving slowly toward the shore. By late afternoon, Anders and Sigrid reached the outskirts of Niskagen. The village looked smaller than Anders remembered, a cluster of dark roofs half buried in snow. Smoke drifted from a few chimneys, but the streets were empty. The mountains loomed behind them, the sanitarium a faint, grey scar against the white horizon. They entered the town quietly, exhaustion weighing on every step. Anders carried the satchel close, as though it might vanish if he loosened his grip. An old man stood outside the general store, chopping wood. When he saw them, he paused mid-swing. "You came from Halberg's place," he said, his voice low, wary. Anders nodded. "We need to contact the authorities. There's been—" But the man shook his head. "The constable went up there 3 days ago. He never came back." Sigrid paled. 3 days. The man frowned. Why? How long were you there?" Anders exchanged a look with Sigrid. "We arrived the morning after Epiphany." The man's expression darkened. "That was over a week ago." A silence stretched between them, broken only by the crunch of snow under the man's boots as he backed away. "Whatever's up there," he muttered, "it's not meant for us to see." They found shelter in a small guest house near the church. The owner, a widow named Marta, offered them tea and a single room. Her hands trembled as she poured. "I used to take laundry up there," she said softly, "before they stopped letting us through the gates. Always felt watched. Even after I came home, I'd see my own face blink in the wash water." Sigrid touched the woman's arm gently. "Did anyone else notice strange things?" Marta nodded. "The pastor tried to bless the place. Said he saw people in the windows, but the rooms were empty. He left his crucifix at the gate and never spoke of it again." That night, as the wind pressed against the shutters, Anders tried to sleep. But the silence of the room was wrong, too deep, too still. He turned toward the small mirror above the dresser and froze. The reflection showed the room exactly as it was, except for one detail. The door in the reflection was open. He sat up slowly, eyes fixed on the mirror. A faint light flickered in its depth, as though from another room beyond the glass. Then came a voice, distant but clear, as if carried through water. "You took my work, Mr. Røkke." Halberg's voice. The lamp beside the bed flared and went out. Sigrid stirred. "What is it?" "Don't look at the mirror," Anders whispered. But it was too late. She had already turned. Her reflection smiled, a small, knowing curve of the lips. Then it raised a hand, though she had not moved. Anders grabbed the blanket and threw it over the mirror. The sound of glass cracking echoed through the room, followed by silence. They sat together on the edge of the bed, breathing hard. Somewhere outside, a church bell tolled once, though no one in Niskagen kept midnight mass in winter. Sigrid whispered, "He's following us through reflections." Anders opened the satchel. Inside, the journal was warm to the touch, as if alive. On the final page, new words had appeared again, written in Halberg's neat, steady script. Phase 8 complete. Observation successful. Subjects adapting to reflection bleed. And beneath it, smaller, fainter, written in a different hand. Help us. In the stillness that followed, Anders realized the truth. The voices in the walls had not been ghosts at all. They were fragments, conscious minds, trapped between mirrors, waiting for release. And somewhere in the reflection, Dr. Halberg waited with them. By morning, the snow had stopped. A brittle frost glazed the rooftops of Niskagen, the light too pale to bring warmth. Anders and Sigrid left the guest house before dawn, the journal wrapped in cloth, determined to reach the telegraph station at the edge of town. But as they walked through the narrow streets, Anders noticed something strange. Every window they passed, each frost-bitten pane, each shop-front mirror, showed their reflections just a fraction too late. A lag, like a breath held before mimicry. Sigrid saw it too. "He's spreading," she whispered. "Every surface that remembers light. He's inside it." They reached the telegraph office. The operator, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses, greeted them with a cautious nod. "Line's been unstable since the storm," he said. "But I can try." Anders handed him a written message. Urgent. Authorities in Oslo. Dr. Halberg Sanitarium. Illegal experiments. Send help. The operator tapped out the code, each click a pulse of hope. But halfway through, the machine stuttered. The brass keys froze mid-motion. Then, slowly, one by one, the letters began typing themselves. Sigrid stepped back. "What's it writing?" The machine clattered in uneven bursts. When it stopped, the paper strip bore a single sentence. "Experiment ongoing. Observation proceeding as planned." The operator stared, pale. "That wasn't me." Anders snatched the strip, crumpled it, and turned to leave. But outside, the air had changed. The village seemed duplicated. Every reflective surface, puddles, glass, even shards of ice, held faint movements, people standing where none existed in reality. They hurried toward the church, the only building without mirrors. Inside, the air smelled of wax and cedar. The priest, Father Liar, emerged from the shadows, his lined face grave. "I knew you would come," he said softly. "The mountain's curse follows all who cross that threshold." Anders opened the journal. It's not a curse. It's science twisted beyond its limits. He built a network of reflections, a conduit for consciousness. He's alive in them. Father Liar crossed himself. "Then you brought him here." Before Anders could answer, the candles flickered violently. The polished brass of the altar gleamed like molten gold, and in it, the priest's reflection smiled though he did not. Sigrid screamed. The reflection stepped forward from the surface, as if the mirror of the world itself had thinned. Its eyes were glassy, its mouth forming the words in Halberg's voice. "The body is nothing. The reflection remembers everything." Anders grabbed a candlestick and struck the mirror. The apparition shattered into 1,000 fragments, each shard flickering with pale light before fading. The church fell silent. Father Liar knelt, trembling. "You cannot destroy him," he whispered. "Only contain him. Sanctify the reflections, all of them." Anders stared down at the broken glass, at his distorted face reflected 100 times. "If that's true," he said, "then we need to go back." Sigrid turned to him, horrified. "Back? You can't mean." "He started it there," Anders said quietly. "That's where it has to end." He lifted the journal, now pulsing faintly with heat, as though it knew. "Phase 10, he murmured. "The final phase." Outside, the wind had risen again, carrying with it a low hum that spread through the valley, the sound of power awakening in the mountains. And somewhere beyond the forest, the windows of the sanitarium began to glow once more. The return to the mountain was silent. No birds sang in the trees. No branches cracked beneath the snow. It was as if the forest itself had learned to hold its breath. Anders and Sigrid trudged along the frozen path, their lantern casting a narrow cone of light. Behind them, Father Liar followed with a wooden crate strapped to his back. Inside it, flasks of holy water, ash, and oil. It wasn't faith that drove him anymore. It was fear. The sanitarium appeared as a black silhouette against the white slope, its windows already alive with a dull glow. Not warm, not human, a light that belonged to another world. "Once we cross the gate," Anders said, "everything inside will hear us, see us." Sigrid's hand brushed his arm. "Then let's make it count." They entered through the old servants' entrance, half buried in snow. The door creaked like it remembered their weight. Inside, the air was thick and cold, each breath a ghost hanging in the dark. The hallways looked different now. Mirrors lined the walls where there had been none. Even the cracked tiles reflected faintly, polished by something unseen. In every surface, fragments of Halberg's face flickered like pieces of a broken lantern slide. Eyes, mouth, hands reaching. The humming returned, steady and rhythmic. It came from the west wing. The laboratory. The door was open. Inside, the mirror chamber was brighter than they'd ever seen. The great central apparatus, a ring of polished glass panels, copper wiring and humming coils, stood pulsing like a heart, and at its center, standing perfectly still, was Dr. Halberg. Not his body, his reflection. The figure was translucent, a man-shaped distortion of light, but the eyes were sharp, aware. He regarded them calmly, as if waiting. "Anders," he said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, "you shouldn't have left." Anders held up the journal. "It ends here, Halberg." The reflection tilted its head. "No, it begins. You can't destroy what is no longer flesh." Sigrid uncorked a flask of sanctified oil and hurled it at the nearest mirror. The glass screamed, not shattered, screamed, as the oil spread across its surface. A ripple ran through the chamber. Halberg's image flickered. Father Liar began to pray. The mirrors trembled. Anders moved toward the control panel, the real machinery Halberg had built to anchor his consciousness. The switches were old, copper-wired, humming with power drawn from the generators buried deep beneath the mountain. He threw the first lever. A blinding surge of light flooded the room. Halberg roared, his voice splitting into a chorus of echoes, every mirror vibrating with it. "Do you think you can silence me?" the reflection bellowed. "I am not in one place. I am in every reflection this world has ever held." Anders slammed down the second lever. The mirrors along the wall cracked, spiderwebbing into 1,000 shards. Sigrid and Father Liar hurled ash and water at the base of the apparatus. The light flared brighter, then began to falter. Halberg stepped forward, flickering, half-formed. "I only wanted to preserve memory," he whispered, "to let the mind live beyond the dying body. Why should death own us?" Anders looked up at him. "Because what you've made isn't life. It's a cage." He reached for the final switch. Halberg's face twisted. The mirrors exploded outward in a storm of light and shards, the force knocking Sigrid to the ground. Father Liar screamed as the fragments swirled around the room, each one carrying a fragment of Halberg's voice. "I see you. I see everything. I will not vanish." Anders pulled the switch. The light died. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one by one, the remaining mirrors dimmed to nothing. The humming ceased. The air no longer vibrated. The laboratory was a ruin. Shattered glass crunched under their boots. In the center of the room, the great mirror apparatus lay dark, its surface blank. Anders staggered forward. The journal in his hand grew cold. He opened it. The last page was blank. Halberg's script was gone. Sigrid knelt beside him, tears streaking the soot on her cheeks. "Is it over?" she whispered. Anders looked at the broken mirror, at his own face reflected in a single remaining shard. His face, and no one else's. "I think so," he said. Father Liar crossed himself slowly. If he was bound to the reflections, then severing the anchor, it should have ended him. Outside, the wind was rising again, but it no longer carried the hum. Only the sound of snow falling on a mountain that could finally rest. They left the sanitarium just before dawn. Behind them, the building stood silent, its windows empty. No glow, no eyes, only a black shape against a white world. At the gate, Anders stopped and turned. He thought of the lives lost, of the voices trapped in the glass, of the man who wanted to live forever and instead built a prison of mirrors. He whispered, "Rest now." Weeks later, the sanitarium was sealed. Authorities from Oslo came, took their statements, boarded up the structure. No one entered again. The village returned to its quiet rhythm. But sometimes, when the lake froze over in the dead of winter, locals swore they saw faint shapes beneath the ice. Faces that turned upward, watching. And in the depths of the mountain, where the generator still slept beneath layers of rock, a single red light blinked once, and then again. And so, the secrets of Dr. Halberg's sanitarium remain buried beneath the snow and shadows, for now. But if you thought this story sent chills down your spine, make sure you don't miss what comes next. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join Eternal Obsidian, where the darkest mysteries never stay hidden for long. Drop a comment below and tell us, would you dare step inside?